Nestled on the edge of a dense fog-laden forest, Blackstone College had a reputation that stretched beyond its academic accolades. The stories whispered among students often rivaled the syllabus itself. It wasn't the ivy-covered buildings or the ancient clock tower that captured attention. It was Dormitory B, an old, three-story structure with creaking floors and a haunting legacy. The dormitory stood apart from the others, both literally and metaphorically. Its shadow loomed over the main campus, and despite a fresh coat of paint, it carried an unsettling aura. The uppermost windows were perpetually shrouded in darkness, even during the brightest afternoons, as if the light dared not enter. For Emma, a freshman eager to start her college journey, Dormitory B wasn't her first choice. She had requested one of the newer, more modern dorms, but due to a last-minute mix-up, she found herself dragging her luggage across the uneven pathway leading to the infamous building. The door, an imposing slab of dark wood with iron fixtures, groaned as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. The lobby was dimly lit, with a solitary chandelier that flickered intermittently. Emma glanced around, taking in the worn furniture and faded wallpaper. A group of seniors lounging on a couch stopped their conversation to glance at her, their expressions unreadable. "Welcome to the haunted house," one of them muttered before bursting into laughter. Emma smiled nervously, brushing off the comment. She climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The hallway was eerily quiet, lined with doors that seemed older than the building itself. Her assigned room, 214, was at the far end, right next to a small, rusted door labeled, "Maintenance Do Not Enter." As she unlocked her door and stepped inside, a chill ran down her spine. The room was modest but functional, a single bed, a wooden desk, and a wardrobe. However, it felt off. The walls seemed to close in ever so slightly, and the single window offered a view of the forest, its trees swaying ominously in the breeze. That night, as Emma unpacked her belongings, she heard faint whispers. At first, she thought it was coming from the hallway, but when she opened her door, it was empty. She shook her head, blaming her imagination and the senior's joke. The whispers continued over the next few nights. They were soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Emma tried to ignore them, focusing on her studies and making friends. But the unease grew. One evening, while brushing her teeth in the shared bathroom, Emma noticed something strange. The mirror above the sink was cracked, and faint words appeared to be etched into the surface. "Leave before it's too late." She stared at the mirror, her breath hitching, but as soon as she wiped it with her sleeve, the words vanished. Determined not to let her fears get the better of her, Emma decided to investigate. She asked a few of her dormmates about the whispers and the strange occurrences, but most shrugged it off, offering vague explanations or dismissing it as part of the building's charm. Except for one. Lila, a quiet sophomore who lived on the third floor, pulled Emma aside one afternoon. "I've heard the whispers too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not your imagination. Something's wrong with this place." When Emma pressed her for details, Lila hesitated before saying, "There's a reason they never let anyone into the maintenance room. And have you noticed how no one talks about what happened here 10 years ago?" Emma's curiosity was piqued, but before she could ask more, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by hurried footsteps. Lila's face paled. "Don't go digging too deep," she warned before retreating to her room. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers grew louder, forming patterns that seemed to come closer and closer to her ear. Just as she sat up to turn on the light, her window rattled violently, despite the stillness outside. Her heart raced as she glanced toward the wardrobe. The door, which she distinctly remembered closing, was now slightly ajar. Emma couldn't sleep that night. Every sound felt amplified. The groaning of the old building, the rustling of leaves outside, and the faint, ever-present whispers that seemed to wrap around her room. Her eyes kept darting to the wardrobe, its door still slightly ajar. She considered getting up to close it, but decided against it. Something about it felt wrong, as if touching it would unleash whatever lurked behind. The next morning, she approached Lila again, determined to get answers. Lila hesitated but eventually relented, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "There was a girl," Lila began, her voice low. 10 years ago, her name was Alyssa. She stayed in this dorm, your room actually. She was quiet, kept to herself, but one night she just vanished. Emma's stomach turned. Vanished? How? No one knows. They found her wardrobe open, her belongings scattered, and... Lila paused, visibly shaken. There was a message scrawled on the wall inside her wardrobe. It said, "It watches from the dark." The college tried to cover it up, but the rumors spread. Some say she ran away. Others think something took her. Emma felt a chill creep down her spine. "What about the maintenance room? Why is it locked?" Lila shook her head. "I've heard stories, but nothing concrete. Some say it's where they store records of past incidents. Others believe it's connected to whatever happened to Alyssa, but no one's been inside, at least no one who came back to tell the tale." Later that evening, Emma couldn't shake the weight of the story. She sat at her desk, staring at the wardrobe. Her curiosity warred with her fear. Finally, she stood up, grabbed her phone for light, and cautiously approached the door. It creaked as she pulled it open. Inside, it seemed normal. Her clothes hung neatly, her suitcase tucked away. But as she moved her hand along the back panel, she felt something odd, a faint etching. She angled her phone's flashlight, revealing faint words scratched into the wood. "Don't let it out." Her breath caught, and she stumbled back, slamming the wardrobe shut. Her heart pounded as she tried to process what she'd just seen. That night, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It was no longer just murmurs. It was a voice, chillingly close, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It sees you." Emma pressed her hands over her ears, willing it to stop. But the voice seemed to burrow into her mind. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, a faint tapping at her door. She froze, staring at the handle, which began to jiggle ever so slightly. Summoning her courage, she crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there. She opened the door cautiously, but the hallway was empty. As she stepped back into her room, she heard it again, the knock. But this time it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the wardrobe. Emma backed away, her hands trembling. The knocks grew louder, more insistent. Then with a deafening bang, the wardrobe door flung open on its own. Inside, the shadows seemed to ripple unnaturally, as if something was moving within them. Her phone flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams across the room. Then she saw it, 2 faint, glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness of the wardrobe. She screamed, slamming the wardrobe shut and throwing herself against it, holding it closed with all her strength. The whispers turned into guttural growls, and the wardrobe shook violently. After what felt like an eternity, the shaking stopped. The room fell silent, save for Emma's ragged breathing. The next morning, she packed a bag and decided she couldn't stay another night. As she made her way to the lobby, she saw a maintenance worker fiddling with the lock on the maintenance room door. It was ajar, just enough for her to catch a glimpse inside. A dusty room filled with old files and photos. One photo in particular caught her eye. It was a group picture of students standing in front of dormitory B, dated over 50 years ago. But what sent chills down her spine was the faint, shadowy figure standing in one of the top-floor windows, its glowing eyes unmistakable. Emma turned to the maintenance worker, her voice shaking. "Do you know what's in there?" The worker gave her a puzzled look. "What are you talking about? This room's been locked for years. No one's allowed inside." Emma blinked, and when she looked again, the door was tightly shut, as if it had never been opened. Emma spent the entire day contemplating what she had seen and heard. Her fear was now a living, breathing entity, wrapping itself around her every thought. But despite her terror, curiosity gnawed at her. The photo, the whispers, the eyes in the wardrobe, they all seemed connected to a story no one wanted to tell. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma made a decision. She couldn't leave without knowing the truth. Armed with her phone, a flashlight, and a deep, trembling resolve, she made her way back to the dormitory. The building seemed different in the darkness. The hallways stretched endlessly, the shadows clinging to the walls like living things. As she approached her room, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. She hadn't left it that way. Emma hesitated, but the pull of answers was stronger than her fear. She pushed the door open, her flashlight sweeping across the room. Everything was as she had left it, except for the wardrobe. Its door stood wide open, the darkness inside almost inviting. Gathering her courage, Emma stepped closer. The air grew colder with each step, her breath visible in the dim light. The words etched inside the wardrobe, "Don't let it out," seemed to glow faintly. She reached out to touch them, and the moment her fingers grazed the surface, the back panel of the wardrobe slid open, revealing a hidden passage. A chill ran down her spine. She peered inside, her flashlight revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The whispers were louder now, echoing up the passage like a chorus of the lost. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Emma stepped inside. The staircase led to an underground room that shouldn't have existed. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with old, dust-covered files and objects. In the center of the room was a large circular mirror, its surface cracked and blackened around the edges. As Emma approached the mirror, the whispers became deafening, forming distinct words. "It sees you. It knows you." Her reflection in the mirror was wrong. It moved independently, its eyes glowing faintly, just like the ones she had seen in the wardrobe. Suddenly her reflection leaned forward and whispered, "Why did you come?" Emma stumbled back, but the mirror began to ripple like water, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged. Its form was indistinct, shifting like smoke, but its eyes were unmistakable, piercing and glowing. The room seemed to close in on her as the figure advanced. Emma tried to run, but the air grew thick, making every movement a struggle. The whispers turned to screams, and the shadow reached out, its form twisting unnaturally. Just as it was about to touch her, Emma remembered the etching in the wardrobe, "Don't let it out." She realized what she had done. The wardrobe had been a seal, a barrier keeping whatever this was contained. With every ounce of strength, Emma turned and bolted up the stairs. The shadow chased her, its inhuman growls echoing through the passage. As she reached her room, she grabbed the wardrobe door and slammed it shut just as the shadow lunged. The building shook violently, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then the whispers stopped. The air felt lighter, as if the entire dormitory had exhaled. Emma didn't stay to see if it would return. She packed her belongings and left the dormitory that night, vowing never to look back. A week later, the college announced that Dormitory B was being closed for renovations. Rumors swirled among the students, but no official explanation was given. Emma transferred to another dorm, far from the cursed building. Yet, even in her new room, she couldn't escape the memories. Late at night, when the campus was silent, she would sometimes hear faint whispers, as if calling her back. And every now and then she would dream of glowing eyes watching her from the darkness. Nestled deep within the sprawling campus of St. Mary's College, Blackwood Hall had stood for over a century, its towering brick facade, covered in creeping ivy, seemed to watch over the students with an eerie, almost sentient presence. Blackwood wasn't just a dorm, it was a relic of another time, filled with whispers of secrets buried deep in its walls. Every freshman who stepped into Blackwood was told the same story: never wander the East Wing alone after midnight. It was a rule spoken in hushed tones, half warning and half urban legend. The East Wing, separated by a set of ancient oak doors that never seemed to fully shut, was off limits. The college's official reason was disrepair, but those who had been there longer whispered of something far darker. The legend went back to the early 1920s when Blackwood Hall served as a boarding house for orphaned children. Sister Eleanor, the caretaker, was a strict yet kind woman who had an unusual fascination with the occult. Some said she dabbled in seances, attempting to communicate with the other side, hoping to bring comfort to the grieving children who had lost their families. But one night something went terribly wrong. That night, as the story goes, a blood-curdling scream tore through the dorm. The townsfolk who arrived the next morning found the East Wing abandoned. Sister Eleanor was never seen again, and 5 children were found huddled together in a locked room, their faces pale with terror and their lips sewn shut. The college quickly covered up the incident, boarding up the East Wing and leaving it to rot. But Blackwood Hall didn't forget. Over the decades, students claimed to hear faint whispers coming from the East Wing at night, even though it was supposed to be empty. Some swore they saw a shadowy figure pacing the hallways, while others reported waking up to find cryptic messages scrawled on their mirrors. "She is still here." One particularly chilling tale came from a senior named Thomas, who stayed behind during a winter break to study. He swore that one night, as the snowstorm howled outside, he heard a soft tapping on his door. Thinking it was a fellow student, he opened it to find the hallway completely empty. But as he turned to close the door, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a pale, veiled figure at the end of the corridor, staring directly at him. Thomas left Blackwood the next morning and never returned. Despite its grim reputation, Blackwood Hall remained a popular dorm due to its central location and affordable rent. Most students dismissed the stories as nothing more than ghostly folklore, the kind that every old building seemed to accumulate. But those who lived there long enough knew better. The air in Blackwood felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of unspeakable events. The lights would flicker without warning, and no matter how many times maintenance checked, the pipes in the East Wing always seemed to echo with faint, untraceable sobs. This year, the dorm welcomed a new group of freshmen, including Mia, a psychology major with a penchant for unraveling mysteries. Mia had heard the tales but brushed them off as exaggerations. However, on her first night in Blackwood, as she unpacked her belongings, she found something unsettling: a small, yellowed envelope tucked under her mattress. Inside was a single piece of paper with a chilling message written in an elegant, old-fashioned script. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last. Beware the veil of night." As Mia read the note, a strange chill swept through the room, and the faint sound of children's laughter echoed down the hallway. She froze, her heart pounding. When she turned toward her window, she saw her reflection in the glass. For a fleeting moment, it wasn't her face staring back, but that of a pale woman with hollow, lifeless eyes. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Mia decided then and there to uncover the truth behind Blackwood Hall. But she had no idea that what awaited her was far more horrifying than any story she'd ever heard. The whispers of the East Wing were about to become her reality. The next morning, as Mia sat in the common room of Blackwood Hall, a sense of unease clung to her. She had tried to dismiss the strange events of the previous night as a trick of the mind, a nightmare perhaps. But the yellowed envelope with its cryptic message haunted her thoughts. She could still hear the faint whispers of children's laughter in her mind, and the unsettling image of the woman's reflection in the window refused to fade. As she sat there, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out of the window at the snow falling gently outside, her thoughts raced. What was happening to her? Was she going mad? Or was Blackwood Hall truly as haunted as the legends claimed? Mia wasn't one to shy away from a mystery, As a psychology major, she had a natural curiosity about the human mind and its propensity to create illusions. Perhaps there was a rational explanation for what she'd experienced. Maybe the creaky old dorm was just playing tricks on her nerves. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that something about the place felt different. It wasn't just the stories. It was the atmosphere. The weight of the building seemed to press down on her, and no matter how much she tried to push it away, a cold shiver ran through her every time she walked past the east wing. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Mia approached two of her new roommates, Sophie and Chloe. Sophie, an anthropology student, had grown up hearing ghost stories and loved discussing the supernatural. Chloe, on the other hand, was a skeptic, always quick to dismiss anything that couldn't be explained by science. Despite their differences, both were intrigued by the strange occurrences Mia had experienced. That evening, the three of them gathered in their room, the flickering fluorescent light casting an eerie glow on the walls. Mia pulled the yellowed envelope from her bag and showed it to them. "Do you guys think this could be real?" Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempts to sound confident. Sophie leaned forward, her eyes wide with excitement. "This is exactly the kind of thing I've been hoping to find. I've heard about Blackwood's history, and I always thought there was something off about this place. There's no way that note was just a coincidence." Chloe rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "You're really going to let this thing get to you, Mia? It's just an old building with a creepy reputation. It's probably some prankster trying to mess with the new students." But even as Chloe spoke, she couldn't hide the uneasy look in her eyes. Mia noticed it, and the doubt in her mind started to grow. Was Chloe just being defensive, or was she hiding something? Sophie, on the other hand, was already deep in thought. "We need to find out more about this place. There has to be something in the archives or records. Maybe we can uncover the truth about Sister Eleanor and what really happened here." Mia nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "That's exactly what I was thinking. We need to go to the library. They must have something. Old newspaper clippings, records from the college, anything that could help us figure this out." Chloe sighed but eventually agreed. "Fine, let's go. But if we end up wasting hours in some dusty old library, don't say I didn't warn you." The three girls made their way to the library, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls of Blackwood Hall. As they entered, the smell of old books and the dim lighting gave the room an almost otherworldly atmosphere. Mia couldn't help but feel that they were being watched as they made their way to the archives section. The library was eerily quiet, and the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed too loud in the stillness. Sophie led the way, pulling open drawers filled with old newspaper clippings, college yearbooks, and records. She quickly scanned through the papers, her eyes lighting up when she found something of interest. "Look at this," Sophie exclaimed, holding up a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearance at Blackwood Hall, Sister Eleanor and the Missing Children." Mia leaned over her shoulder to read the article. It detailed the disappearance of Sister Eleanor in 1922, along with the strange and unsettling events that had followed. According to the article, several children had vanished from the dorm during the night, and Sister Eleanor was said to have been involved in some sort of occult ritual. The article didn't go into much detail, but it confirmed what Mia had already suspected. The history of Blackwood Hall was much darker than anyone had let on. Chloe frowned, her skepticism still intact. "Okay, so there was a weird disappearance, but that's over 100 years ago. What's that got to do with us now?" The room inside was nothing like they expected. It was small, almost suffocating, with dark wooden paneling and a low ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books and dusty relics, but it was the center of the room that held their attention. In the middle stood an old wooden table, covered in strange symbols etched into the surface. There were candles, still burning, arranged in a circle around the table, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows across the room. A chill filled the air, and for a moment the three of them just stood there, frozen in place. Sophie stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. This is where it happened. This is where Sister Eleanor..." Before she could finish, a loud bang echoed through the room, causing the three girls to jump. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. Panic surged through Mia's chest as she turned to the others. "What the hell was that?" she gasped. Chloe's face had gone pale. "It's her. It's Sister Eleanor. She's still here." Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles in a flash. The girls were plunged into darkness. The sound of whispering voices filled the air, low and unintelligible, but unmistakably there. The whispers grew louder until they felt as though the voices were coming from inside their own heads. Mia's heart raced. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light illuminated the room, but as it swept over the walls, it revealed something that made their blood run cold. There, scrawled in blood on the walls, were the words, "She is waiting." A sudden noise made them all jump. Loud footsteps echoed outside the room. It sounded like someone, or something, was coming closer. The door that had been slammed shut began to shake violently, as if something on the other side was trying to get in. "Get us out of here," Chloe screamed, her voice trembling in fear. Mia's mind raced. "We have to find the exit now." As they scrambled to the door, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. A figure draped in a tattered black veil appeared before them. The figure was tall, almost towering, and its face was hidden beneath the veil. But Mia could feel its gaze, cold and penetrating, locking onto her. Without warning, the figure raised a hand, and the temperature in the room plummeted even further. The thick fog began to swirl around them, and the lights in the room flickered wildly, casting distorted, monstrous shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, and Mia could barely hear herself think over the deafening noise in her ears. "Run!" Sophie screamed, and without hesitation, the three girls bolted for the door. But as they reached the exit, the figure lunged at them, its cold hand gripping Mia's arm with an unearthly strength. She screamed, trying to pull away, but the figure's grip tightened, dragging her toward the center of the room. "Help, somebody help," Mia cried out, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening roar of the whispers. Chloe and Sophie managed to drag Mia free, and the three of them stumbled out of the room, their hearts pounding in terror. As they ran down the hall, they heard the door slam shut behind them, as if something or someone was locking them out. They didn't stop running until they reached the main part of Blackwood Hall. Breathless and shaken, they collapsed onto the floor in the common room, struggling to calm their racing hearts. "What the hell just happened?" Chloe gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Mia couldn't speak at first. She was too shaken, her mind racing with what they had just witnessed, the figure, the whispers, the blood-written message. It all pointed to one terrifying truth. Sister Eleanor. "She never left," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "And she's not alone." The girls sat in silence, the weight of what they had just uncovered settling heavily on their shoulders. They had come seeking answers, but they had found something far worse. An ancient evil, bound to the halls of Blackwood, waiting to be unleashed once more. As the minutes passed, a deep, unsettling